Why do backyard chickens stop laying in winter? And what if cold is not the reason at all? Most people believe their flock shuts down in December because of the weather. That's not what's happening. Three specific things stop egg production in a winter flock, and temperature is not on the list. The keepers who average 8 to 10 eggs a day from 12 hens through January are not doing anything exotic. They've stopped fighting the wrong enemy. I've managed a laying flock through New England winters for 11 years, and the first 3 of those winters, I blamed the cold every time production dropped. Changed nothing, complained a lot, bought a heat lamp that created a fire risk I didn't need, and averaged about 3 eggs a day from 12 hens in January. The heat lamp cost $4 and ran up the electric bill. The actual fix cost $8 total. I just didn't know what the actual fix was yet. Then I started tracking what changed before production dropped and found that 2 of the 3 real causes were correctable with under $30 in equipment, and the third was a management decision I'd been making wrong for years. Near the end, I'm covering the breed timing strategy that most backyard keepers accidentally stumble onto without understanding why it works. The one that produces full winter output, without supplemental lighting or any other intervention. The 3 things that stop winter production: insufficient light, poor protein status going into molt, and freezing water. That's the complete list. Cold temperatures, absent some extreme edge case, don't suppress egg production through any hormonal mechanism. The belief that they do is why most people waste money on heat lamps that create fire hazards instead of spending $14 on a timer and a bulb. The light mechanism is specific. A hen detects light through her eyes and also through deep skull photoreceptors in the pineal gland that respond to light penetrating the skull directly. When cumulative daily light exposure drops below 14 hours, the pineal gland reduces its signal to the pituitary, luteinizing hormone output falls, and the ovarian follicle cycle stops releasing yolks. Poultry science publications going back to the 1950s document this mechanism precisely. A timer-controlled LED on a 15-hour daily cycle, set to turn on before sunrise to extend the morning rather than the evening, maintains the LH trigger through the darkest months. The timer costs $14, and roughly the price of 2 fast food lunches. The bulb costs $4. Penn State Extension specifically notes that exceeding 16 total hours depletes the finite follicle reserve faster, shortening the hen's productive life without increasing output. 15 hours is the number, and it takes 2 full weeks for the hormonal cycle to respond to the new light signal. So if you plug in the timer after production has already dropped in November, don't expect results before mid-December. The placement of the light inside the coop also matters. A single 9-watt LED equivalent positioned in the center of the coop ceiling, roughly 6 feet above the floor, about the height of a standard door frame, distributes light evenly enough to reach every perch position. A bulb jammed into one corner leaves birds on the opposite side, in partial shadow, that doesn't fully trigger the response. If your coop is longer than 12 feet, roughly the length of a mid-size car, add a second bulb on the same timer, rather than relying on one to cover the full run. Molt is the second production killer, and the one with the most room to fix quickly. A hen in hard molt has redirected every available protein resource from egg synthesis to feather keratin production. Feathers are roughly 80 to 85% protein by dry weight. She cannot do both at once at full capacity. If she goes into molt on a standard 16% layer pellet ration with no supplemental protein, the molt runs 10 to 14 weeks. Push protein intake to 20 to 22% the moment you see pin feathers emerging, and the molt runs 6 to 8 weeks, putting her back in production before the coldest part of winter. Kansas State University's Poultry Extension has published specifically on protein and molt duration. The practical protocol: switch from layer feed to Purina flock raiser at 20% protein. Add black soldier fly larvae daily at about a tablespoon per bird, roughly the volume of a shot glass, and scatter black oil sunflower seeds once a day for their methionine content. Black oil sunflower seeds run about 16% protein, same as layer pellets, but the methionine and linoleic acid profile they carry is specifically relevant to feather keratin synthesis. The Western Sayre Foothills Farm. Study from 2019 documented 9% higher egg output on fermented feed versus dry feed over a comparable trial period. The mechanism is phytic acid reduction. If fermenting whole grain for 48 to 72 hours before feeding lets lactobacillus bacteria produce phytase, which breaks down phytic acid and releases bound phosphorus and trace minerals, the hen gets more nutrition per gram. That same bioavailability improvement shortens the molt when protein is already high. In my tracking on 12 birds, November averages went from 4 eggs per day to 7.5 after I adopted the protein protocol. Same coop, same birds, different feed timing. Frozen water is the third stop-laying factor, and the one that looks like a cold problem when it's actually an infrastructure problem. A laying hen needs between 500 milliliters and a full liter of water per day to maintain production, roughly the volume of a standard water bottle to a slightly larger sports bottle. An egg is approximately 74% water. Ohio State Extension's Poultry Management Program documents that even partial water restriction in laying hens produces production drops within 24 hours. In a New England winter, if your water source freezes overnight, your birds are waking up each morning to an ice block. By the time you swap it out at 8 a.m., they've gone 2 to 3 hours without water on the coldest morning of the year. The fix is a heated waterer base, a metal disc heater placed under a metal fount that keeps water above freezing in all but the most extreme cold snaps. It costs $28 at Tractor Supply, roughly the price of 4 dozen eggs at a farmer's market. It uses about $8 to $10 per month in electricity running continuously in winter. I spent 4 winters carrying hot water out twice a day before I did the math, and realized I was spending the equivalent of that $28 in time and frustration every single month. My wife mentioned this fact on 2 separate occasions before I acted on it. She was right both times. Ventilation is the most misunderstood topic in winter chicken management, and the confusion comes from conflating 2 completely different things: drafts and airflow. A draft is direct moving air at roost height, coming through a gap in the wall or an unsealed window near where birds sleep. That does cause respiratory stress and frostbite on combs and wattles because exhaled moisture condenses on cold skin. Airflow is passive movement of humid air out of the coop through high openings, above the roost line by at least 12 inches, and at roughly the length of a standard ruler toward the ridge or eave. That is not optional. 12 hens produce roughly 2 pounds of moisture per day through respiration and droppings combined. Without high ventilation, that moisture saturates bedding, creates ammonia buildup, and condenses on combs and wattles. The cold you're trying to keep out is less damaging than the wet you're trapping inside. The 1940s co-op research of Kennard and Chamberlain at the Ohio Agricultural Experiment Station documented that birds in dry, well-ventilated coops survived and produced through temperatures that compromised birds in sealed, warm coops. Seal everything below the roost line on the windward side of the coop. Leave the upper vents fully open. Breeds with small combs, rose comb, or pea comb types like Wyandottes and Easter eggers now handle cold far better than single comb breeds because less exposed tissue is available for frost damage. I lost 2 birds to frostbite in year 2 before I understood that moisture was doing the damage, not temperature. Both coops were cold. Only the humid one cost me birds. The practical fix on an existing coop is to identify the prevailing wind direction in your area and seal all gaps on that side of the coop below roost level with foam backer rod and exterior caulk, roughly $8 in materials at any hardware store. Then cut or enlarge ventilation openings at the opposite high eave, at least 2 inches per bird as a minimum, though 4 is better. Cover those openings with half-inch hardware cloth to keep predators out while maintaining airflow. The investment is under $20 total on most co-ops, and it's the single change that has made the most consistent difference across all 11 winters I've tracked. Breed matters more to winter production than almost any other single variable, and it's a decision you make once at purchase rather than every day at the feeder. Production breeds, specifically the sex-link hybrids like red stars, golden comets, and black sex-links, were developed with reduced photoperiod sensitivity as a commercial trait. They respond less dramatically to shortening days than heritage breeds because their laying cycle was selected for year-round commercial performance. Rhode Island Reds average 250 to 300 eggs per year and maintain roughly 60 to 70% of peak production through winter without supplemental lighting. Black Australorps, which hold the documented world record of 364 eggs in 365 days per the Australian Livestock Records Bureau's 1922 records, have black plumage that absorbs solar heat efficiently during outdoor winter access. Heritage breeds like Buff Orpingtons and Brahmas are cold tolerant, but they molt harder and longer, and their winter production dip is more pronounced. If your priority is January eggs, run Australorps, Sex Lynx, or Barred Rocks. Deep litter, the bedding management system where you allow the floor material to build up and compost in place rather than cleaning on a fixed schedule, adds a measurable thermal benefit that most people underestimate. The Kennard and Chamberlain research from the Ohio Agricultural Experiment Station documented that actively composting deep litter, maintained at 8 to 12 inches depth, at roughly the height of a standard coffee mug, raises the coop floor temperature 8 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient through microbial heat generation. Birds pick through it continuously, ingesting B12 and other microbial byproducts that support immune and reproductive function. One firm rule: don't use diatomaceous earth in a deep litter system. It kills the microorganisms that drive the composting process and eliminates both the thermal and nutritional benefit. I learned that trying to solve a mite problem in November and accidentally sterilizing my entire litter bed. The mites survived. The beneficial biology did not. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribe. Every week I cover practical backyard food production with documented results from a working residential lot. No agenda, nothing to sell, just what the flock actually shows across 11 winters. Free choice oyster shell and fermented feed address two different production problems that are both worse in winter, and most people handle neither one correctly. The oyster shell mechanic first, because it's the cheaper fix and the one with the most immediate impact. An eggshell is 94 to 97% calcium carbonate and weighs approximately 2 grams. A hen laying 200 eggs per year is depositing close to a pound of calcium in shells annually from a body that weighs 6 to 8 pounds. The calcium in commercial layer feed releases quickly during the day. Shell formation happens primarily at night. Free choice oyster shell, meaning a separate container the bird can access any time rather than calcium mixed into the ration at a fixed percentage. All lets each bird self-regulate her intake based on what she actually needs. Ohio State's Poultry Management Extension specifically recommends separate containers for exactly this reason. Forced calcium in a fixed ration can be overdosed by non-laying birds and underdosed by high-production birds simultaneously, while Free Choice calibrates both. A 50-pound bag of crushed oyster shell costs about $12, roughly the weight of 2 large bags of flour, and lasts a 12-hen flock 3 to 4 months. The fermented feed detail connects to the Engberg et al. Study published in British Poultry Science in 2009, a controlled trial with 480 Babcock hens that documented heavier eggs, greater shell stiffness measured at 161 versus 150 newtons per millimeter, and better feed conversion on fermented rations versus dry rations. Those are not vague improvements. Those are measured outcomes from a peer-reviewed trial. 3 5-gallon buckets in rotation, roughly the combined volume of a large kitchen trash bag, with whole grain soaked 48 to 72 hours at room temperature, produces a ferment that smells like sourdough when it's working. If it smells like sulfur, dump it and restart. Raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar at 1 tablespoon per gallon of drinking water 3 days per week rounds out the gut health approach. University of Kentucky Poultry Extension documents reduced respiratory illness incidence in winter flocks receiving consistent low-dose ACV. Use unfiltered with visible sediment at the bottom. The clear filtered version is acidic water and not much else. Evening scratch grain addresses a thermoregulatory problem that sounds almost too simple until you understand what's happening metabolically. When a hen digests whole grain overnight, the fermentation occurring in her crop, the storage pouch at the base of her throat where feed is held before passing to the gizzard, generates modest body heat through microbial carbohydrate metabolism. Ohio State Extension specifically recommends a small handful of whole corn or mixed scratch grain scattered on the coop floor 30 to 60 minutes before roosting as a cold weather management practice. The hard constraint: scratch grain cannot exceed 10% of the total diet or the protein dilution suppresses production as much as the thermal benefit helps it. 1 handful per 10 birds, not a scoop, 1 handful. Black oil sunflower seeds carry methionine, all a sulfur-containing amino acid that is the rate-limiting building block for feather keratin. During winter, when your birds are maintaining a full feather coat after molt, methionine in the diet supports feather quality, which is the bird's primary insulation. Better insulation means less metabolic energy spent on thermoregulation and more available for egg synthesis. 1 to 2 tablespoons of BOS per bird per day, scattered on the ground to encourage foraging behavior that combats winter inactivity stress, covers the methionine supplementation without pushing dietary fat high enough to cause problems. University of Illinois Poultry Nutrition. Research documents the vitamin E concentration in BOS as specifically relevant to immune function during cold stress periods in laying hens. The spring pullet timing strategy is the one most people stumble onto accidentally and never fully understand. A pullet hatched in March or April begins laying in September or October, just as natural daylight is dropping below 14 hours. But she is different from a 2-year-old hen in October in one critical way. She has not yet experienced her first hard molt. The annual molt is triggered by a combination of shortened photoperiod and cumulative metabolic stress from a full production season. A pullet in her first laying fall has only been producing for 6 to 8 weeks. She hasn't accumulated the follicular stress load that triggers a full molt in an established hen. She crosses her first winter producing nearly normally because her system hasn't hit the biological reset switch yet. Her first serious molt comes in the second fall. This is why keepers who purchase spring pullets every March report that their chickens never stop laying in winter. They're observing the first-year exception to the molt cycle, not exceptional cold hardiness. Backyard Poultry magazine has covered the flock age stagger approach as the primary recommendation for year-round production without supplemental lighting. Time the new pullets to begin laying 4 to 6 weeks before daylight, drops below 14 hours in your region, roughly late August in New England and the upper Midwest. So they're established in production before the hormonal suppression window opens. A hen at point of lay, the age at which she begins producing eggs, needs to be there by early September for the timing to work in cold northern climates. Working backward at 18 to 22 weeks from the point of lay means purchasing chicks in late March to mid-April. The specific hatchery detail that catches people every year. Hatcheries sell out of spring chicks fast. Murray McMurray and Meyer Hatchery typically open their spring booking in November or December for March and April hatches. If you wait until March to order April chicks, you're often looking at a June ship date, which puts your pullets at point of lay in October or November, which is too late. Book in December for an April hatch. It's a 2-minute online order that changes your entire winter production cycle. Red light versus white light for the coop timer is a real and documented distinction. The photoreceptors in a hen's eye and skull that trigger luteinizing hormone production respond to red wavelengths at lower intensity thresholds than to white or blue light. Research in poultry science literature documents that red-spectrum LED bulbs at identical wattage produce equivalent hormonal stimulation for the laying cycle with measurably lower aggression, reduced feather pecking, and less flock stress. A hen's visual system is tuned to detect the dominant red wavelengths of dawn and dusk, which are the natural signals regulating the reproductive cycle in wild birds. Switching from white to red, LED on the timer, costs about $4 if you're replacing a bulb anyway. On the limit side, there are 4 situations where everything described here underperforms. Extreme cold climates, sustained temperatures below -20 Fahrenheit, roughly 50 degrees below the freezing point, stress birds physiologically in ways that management can partially but not fully offset. In those regions, Chanticleers, bred specifically for subarctic Quebec conditions, or Buckeyes outperform production breeds in extreme cold. Below 6 hens, daily variation from individual birds swamps any production trends, making it hard to know whether your changes are working. Third winter and older flocks will drop production regardless of management because follicle reserves deplete with age, and no supplement replaces follicles that are gone. And sudden production drops that don't respond to any of the interventions on this list are almost always disease, specifically infectious bronchitis, Newcastle, or Mycoplasma gallisepticum, and need a poultry veterinarian or state extension lab. Oh, not more oyster shell. The exact timing window for the spring pullet strategy that I teased at the start. Most of what's on this list requires purchasing something or changing a daily routine. This one requires only a calendar decision made in February or March. The window that matters is narrow, and most people miss it by 6 weeks in one direction or the other. If your pullets reach point of lay in late October or November, they have just started producing as the photoperiod suppressive window is already fully established. They'll pause or produce poorly before they build momentum. If they reach point of lay in late July or August, they produce through summer, then hit a partial first molt in September or October, knocking them back 4 to 6 weeks right at the start of winter. The target is point of lay in September. Ideally the first 2 weeks of September in New England or the upper Midwest, when natural daylight is still above 13 hours and there's enough light to establish the laying cycle before suppression begins. For production breeds at 18 to 22 weeks to point of lay, that means hatch or chick purchase in mid to late April. Meyer Hatchery and Murray McMurray both offer April hatching schedules that time correctly for this strategy. I almost didn't cover this in the script because it sounds too simple, but I ran the December numbers before and after building this timing into my flock rotation 3 years ago. Before, my December average was 4.8 eggs per day from 12 hens with lighting on a timer. After adding a cohort of first-year April pullets every spring alongside my second and third-year birds, 7.4 eggs per day in December on the same 12-bird count. Same timer, same feed, different age composition. The pullet cohort is not a silver bullet. On years where I missed the April timing window and bought June chicks instead, the November numbers looked like my pre-strategy winters. The timing is the thing. Get that right and everything else compounds on top of it. That's what the combination looks like when it's running correctly. Pick 3 things off this list and apply them before the first freeze, not 15. 3. Adding all of them simultaneously in October means you have no idea which one is moving the number when December comes. The timer and red LED bulb, free choice oyster shell in a separate container. And this coming spring, buy your new pullets in April rather than March so they hit point of lay in September instead of July. Those 3 changes alone will move your January egg count more than any other combination I've tested. Everything else on this list is optimization on top of that foundation. Start there. The rest follows. And if your December count is already where you want it, you already know which 3 you picked. The goal was never all 15. The goal was January eggs.